In Southern California, one serial killer has been accused of committing 14 murders of a heinous nature. However, the actual number of victims is believed to be at least 21, with the killings occurring over the course of a single year. William Bonin, the notorious serial killer, was active during the late 1970s and early 1980s. Due to the manner of his victims' deaths, he was known as the Freeway Killer until his arrest by the police. This moniker was previously shared by two other serial killers, Patrick Kearney and Randy Stephen Kraft. Even a seasoned prosecutor was visibly taken aback when confronted with the sheer depravity of William's actions, describing him as the most malevolent individual in history. William was born in January 1947 in Connecticut. He has two brothers. William was born into a family beset by a series of unfortunate circumstances. Both of his parents struggled with alcoholism, with his father exhibiting particularly problematic behavior. In addition to being an alcoholic, his father was also a compulsive gambler. It was evident that whenever his father was in a bad mood, he would resort to violence against his wife and children. Due to the unfortunate behavior of their parents, the children were frequently placed in the care of their grandfather. However, their grandfather was also an evil man, a convicted child molester. He molested William's mother when she was still young, and as a result, William and his mother were unable to escape the tragic fate of being sexually abused by their grandfather. In order to protect them from their father's violence and grandfather's sexual abuse, William's mother placed them in an orphanage. However, it is well documented that these welfare institutions typically administer harsh punishments to children who misbehave. These punishments can range from severe beatings to drowning and asphyxiation, and William was subjected to prolonged and more painful torture and sexual abuse. William was reunited with his parents at the age of 9. However, just a year later, he was incarcerated in a juvenile detention center for misdemeanor offenses, including the theft of a license plate from a vehicle. During his time in detention, he was subjected to repeated sexual abuse by individuals older than him. In 1961, the family relocated to a modest house in Los Angeles, California, which marked the beginning of William's criminal career. His experience of sexual abuse at the hands of men during his childhood ultimately contributed to his own proclivity towards perpetrating similar acts. Following his father's demise from cirrhosis of the liver, William commenced a pattern of repeated child molestation in the neighborhood, targeting not only his own brother but also children from the surrounding area. In addition to these acts of molestation, he perpetrated several robberies and petty thefts. Shortly after graduating from high school, William became engaged. This was due to his mother's belief that marrying a woman would enable him to alter his feelings towards men. However, William subsequently opted to join the United States Air Force in order to avoid marriage. During his service, he was deployed to Vietnam, where he held the position of gunner. He spent 5 months in Vietnam with over 700 combat and patrol hours. Additionally, he sexually assaulted several Vietnamese males and 2 fellow soldiers. According to William's account, he once risked his life to save the life of a fellow soldier while under enemy fire. As a result, he received a medal in recognition of his bravery. In October 1968, William was honorably discharged from the Army and returned to Los Angeles to live with his mother. He subsequently married his fiancée, but the marriage was short-lived and ended in divorce. On November 17, 1968, at the age of 21, William sexually assaulted a juvenile male. Over the subsequent 4-month period, he sexually assaulted 3 additional males, all of whom were between the ages of 12 and 18. In early 1969, William was apprehended while attempting to sexually assault a 16-year-old juvenile who had been lured into a vehicle. He was subsequently charged with 5 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of sodomy, 1 count of oral copulation, and 1 count of indecent assault. He entered a guilty plea to the charges of molestation and sodomy, and was admitted to Atascadero State Hospital in January 1971 as a mentally impaired sex offender. While detained at this hospital, William underwent a series of psychiatric examinations. The results of these examinations revealed an above-average IQ of 121, but also indicated damage to the prefrontal cortex of his brain and the presence of traits of manic depression. This latter diagnosis meant that he was barely able to suppress any violent impulses. Following a 2-year period of incarceration at Atascadero State Hospital, William was transferred to a correctional facility and deemed unfit for further psychiatric treatment. This decision was primarily based on his history of engaging in sexual acts with other male inmates against their will. On June 11, 1974, following a misdiagnosis by a physician, William was determined to no longer represent a threat to the health and safety of others and was subsequently released from prison. On September 8, 1975, William perpetrated his first act of murder. On that day, he encountered a 14-year-old boy named David McVicker in Gadsden Grove. David was returning to his residence and was traversing the street, experiencing distress over the means of reaching his destination, when he encountered William driving by and, following a period of discussion, entered William's vehicle. While the vehicle was in motion, David was taken aback when William inquired as to his sexual orientation and requested an immediate cessation of the journey. William, undeterred, proceeded to navigate the vehicle to a secluded field, retrieved a firearm, and compelled David to disrobe. William then subjected David to a brief physical assault and proceeded to engage in sexual intercourse with him despite David's evident distress. Subsequently, William covered David's head with his shirt as he attempted to murder him. However, in a surprising turn of events, when David began to scream, William released him, expressed remorse, and drove David safely to his residence. In the aftermath of this traumatic experience, David confided in his mother, who promptly contacted the authorities in Gadsden Grove. 2 days later, William was apprehended by the police and formally charged with rape, kidnapping, and attempted murder. On December 31, 1975, William was sentenced to a term of 1 to 15 years imprisonment, which he served at the California Men's Facility in San Luis Obispo. He was subsequently released on parole on October 11, 1978. Following his release, William relocated to an apartment complex in southeastern Los Angeles County and secured employment as a truck driver for a Montebello-based delivery company, Dependable Driveaway. At the time, William, who was engaged in illicit activities, made a point of disseminating information throughout the neighborhood, indicating that he permitted male minors to socialize at his residence and provided them with alcoholic beverages. To alleviate the concerns of these individuals, he also identified a female companion with whom he regularly engaged in social activities, including dining and consuming beverages. This was intended to demonstrate that he had no ulterior motives regarding his interactions with the boys. During this period, William also regularly attended social gatherings in the neighborhood. Through these events, he formed friendships with 2 individuals, a 21-year-old man named Vernon Butts and an 18-year-old boy named Gregory Miley. Butts, a factory worker and part-time magician with a proclivity for the occult, and Miley, an illiterate man with an IQ of 56, both of whom would become future accomplices of William's. The initial homicide for which William was indicted was that of Thomas Glenn Lundgren, a 13-year-old boy. Lundgren was last observed at 10:50 a.m. on May 28, 1979, when he departed from his parents' residence. Later that afternoon, law enforcement officials discovered his body in Agoura wearing only a t-shirt, shoes, and socks. An autopsy revealed that Lundgren had been sexually assaulted, that he had suffered blows to his face and head with a blunt object, and that his skull had experienced multiple fractures and breaks. Additionally, his throat had been incised, his body had sustained extensive lacerations, and he had been strangled with a wire. His underwear, jeans, and severe genitals were also discovered in a field in close proximity to the crime scene. The murder was perpetrated with the assistance of William, who served as the primary architect of the crime, and Butts, who played a supporting role. On August 4, 1979, 2 months after the murder of Thomas Lundgren, William and Butts abducted a 17-year-old boy named Mark Shelton. Mark had initially planned to visit a movie theater in the vicinity of Beach Boulevard. However, shortly after departing his residence, he was forcibly abducted by William in the neighborhood. His body was subsequently discovered in San Bernardino County. The autopsy report indicated that the young man had been sexually assaulted and that his anus was severely lacerated and widely dilated, suggesting the insertion of a substantial object. Subsequently, Williams and Butts encountered a 17-year-old West German student named Marcus Grabs, who was attempting to hitchhike from the Pacific Coast Highway. Once in the vehicle, Grabs was restrained with rope and ignition wires and transported to Williams' residence. There, he was sodomized, beaten, and stabbed a total of 77 times. Subsequently, after waiting until he was dead, William discarded his body in front of Malibu Creek near Genesis Canyon Road in Las Virgenes. On August 27th, William and Butts abducted a 15-year-old Hollywood youth named Donald Ray Hayden. At 1 a.m., Hayden was observed walking on Santa Monica Boulevard, and this was the last known sighting of him. By the time the sun had risen, a construction worker discovered the body in a dumpster situated in close proximity to a Ventura Freeway exit. The autopsy report indicated that Hayden had been restrained, assaulted, and sodomized prior to his death by strangulation. He had sustained stab wounds to the neck and genitals with a bladed weapon and exhibited evidence of severe cranial trauma. 2 weeks after the murder of Donald Hayden on September 9th, William and Butts encountered a 17-year-old youth named David Luis Murillo, who was on his way to the movie theater on his bicycle at the time. For reasons that remain unclear, Murillo was lured into William's van. Once there, he was tied up, raped repeatedly, beaten, and then strangled with a wire. 8 days later, on September 17th, an 18-year-old named Robert Christopher Verostek was abducted while riding his bicycle to his place of employment at a grocery store. His body was subsequently discovered on Interstate 10 on September 27th. No further homicides occurred until November 1st, although it is possible that additional victims may have been killed and their bodies not discovered. At that time, William and Butts perpetrated the kidnapping and murder of a young man of approximately 5 feet 10 inches in height, likely between the ages of 19 and 25. The victim had sustained severe blunt force trauma and evidence of sharp force injuries to the nose and ears. His body was discovered in a ditch adjacent to State Highway 99 in the vicinity of Taft, Kern County. Approximately 4 weeks later, William perpetrated the kidnapping and strangulation of a 17-year-old male named Frank Dennis Fox. The victim's body was discovered in close proximity to the Ortega Highway, situated approximately 5 miles east of San Juan Capistrano. The victim exhibited visible indentations on his face and head, as well as visible strangulation marks on his wrists and ankles. 10 days after the murder of Frank Fox, a 15-year-old youth named John Frederick Kilpatrick went missing while en route to the residence of an acquaintance. His body was discovered on December 13th, and he was designated as John Doe until his identity was ascertained. On January 1st, 1980, William perpetrated a second murder, this time of 16-year-old Michael Francis McDonald. The body was not discovered until 2 days later, found off Highway 71 in western San Bernardino County. On February 3rd, William traveled to Hollywood with Miley with the specific intent of furthering the murder. They encountered a 15-year-old boy named Charles Miranda, who was standing near a nightclub along Santa Monica Boulevard trying to hitchhike. While Miley was operating the vehicle, William and Miranda engaged in sexual intercourse in the rear of the van. William then informed Miley in a low voice that the individual in question was going to die. Subsequently, Miranda was restrained by William, who inquired about his financial resources. In response, Miranda stated that he possessed approximately $6, prompting Miley to seize the young man's wallet. Additionally, Miley attempted to rape Miranda, but was unable to achieve erection. In a state of intense frustration, Miley proceeded to attack Miranda with a variety of sharp objects, subsequently assisting William in the beating and murder of the young man. 5 minutes after the disposal of Miranda's body, William and Miley stated, "I am experiencing sexual arousal once more. Let us engage in sexual intercourse again." Subsequently, in Huntington Beach, they encountered a 12-year-old male named James McCobb at a bus stop situated at the intersection of Beach Boulevard and Slater Avenue. McCobb was lured into the van, where William promised to drop him off at the Disneyland park where he had reservations. However, upon arriving at a supermarket parking lot, William forced McCobb into the back of the van for sexual intercourse while Millie operated the vehicle in a seemingly aimless and haphazard manner. As he drove, Miley continued to hear McCobb crying. Upon the cessation of the crying, he stopped the car and followed William as he proceeded to beat McCobb before strangling him with his shirt. On February 4th, William was apprehended by the authorities for violating the conditions of his parole. He was subsequently detained at the Orange County Jail until March 4th, when he was released on bail. 10 days following William's release, on March 14th, he perpetrated the kidnapping and murder of an 18-year-old individual named Ronald Gatlin. Subsequent to his abduction by William, the victim was subjected to physical abuse, including sodomy and multiple lacerations to the ears and neck. He was then strangled. The body was discovered the following day in Duarte, with the hands and feet tied. On March 21st, while the youths were all attending school, William lured a 14-year-old boy named Glenn Barker into his van. In a manner consistent with the perpetrator's modus operandi, Barker was subjected to sexual assault, physical violence, and asphyxiation. His corpse exhibited evidence of extensive cigarette burns. Additionally, he had been subjected to penetration with an object foreign to the body and sustained severe trauma to the anus. On the same day, at 16 o'clock, a 15-year-old male named Russell Robb was abducted from a bus stop in Gadsden Grove. Following approximately 8 hours of captivity, he was subjected to sexual assault, physical abuse, and asphyxiation. His body was subsequently discarded in the Cleveland National Forest, alongside that of Glenn Barker. 2 days later, Following a social gathering at a neighbor's residence, William extended an offer of transportation to a man named William Ray Pooh. During the course of the drive, William inquired as to Pooh's interest in engaging in sexual intercourse with him. Pooh, taken aback by the inquiry, remained silent. After a period of several minutes, he attempted to exit the vehicle. In response, William grasped Pooh by the collar and forcibly returned him to the passenger seat. William then revealed to Pooh that he had a penchant for apprehending young male hitchhikers on Friday and Saturday nights. He proceeded to describe the subsequent kidnapping and abuse of these individuals before ultimately strangling them with their own t-shirts. William then informed Pooh in a matter-of-fact tone, "If one is to commit murder, it is advisable to have a plan for the disposal of the body before selecting a victim." Given that the two men were observed departing the gathering together, Pooh survived, and William did not opt to murder or harm him. For reasons that remain unclear, Pooh ultimately opted to collaborate with William. On March 24th, William and Pooh abducted a 15-year-old runaway named Harry Todd Turner from a street in Los Angeles. Following the kidnapping and sodomy, Turner remained unable to evade his demise. His autopsy report indicated that his genitals had been mutilated and that his body had sustained a total of 8 injuries prior to strangulation. It is difficult to fathom the extent of the trauma he endured. On the afternoon of April 10th, William abducted a 16-year-old named Stephen John Wood when he was walking to school after attending a dental appointment. The victim's body was subsequently discovered in an alley in Long Beach near Pacific Coast Highway, exhibiting signs of physical abuse. 3 weeks later, on April 29th, William and Butts parked on the grounds of a Stanton supermarket and lured a 19-year-old employee named Darren Kendrick into William's van under the pretext of selling drugs. Kendrick was subsequently kidnapped and taken to Butts' apartment, where he was severely beaten by 2 men. In addition to sodomy, the victim was forced to drink hydrochloric acid, which caused corrosive chemical burns to his mouth, jaw, stomach, and chest. Butts then stabbed him in the ear with an ice pick, resulting in fatal injuries to his cervical vertebrae. The victim's body was subsequently discarded behind a warehouse near Artesia Highway. Subsequently, on May 17th, William murdered his 17-year-old friend, Lawrence Sharp. When he was later apprehended, he stated that upon waking that morning, he resolved to kill him due to his growing fatigue from his presence. Even his friend was not spared from the brutal treatment. He was beaten with great force and then strangled, in addition to being sodomized. 2 days later, on May 19th, William requested Butts' assistance in committing further homicides. However, Butts declined to participate in this subsequent act of violence. It is plausible that Butts refused because he was aware that William was capable of murdering even his closest associates. In this instance, William acted independently when he abducted a 14-year-old male named Sean King at a bus stop and subsequently discarded his body in Live Oak Canyon in Yucaipa. 9 days after Sean King's murder, William invited an 18-year-old homeless transient named James Michael Monroe to take up residence in the apartment he shared with his mother. As in the case of Miley, Monroe was a bisexual male who engaged in sexual activity with women and also entered into a consensual sexual relationship with William. By the early 1980s, the murders committed by the Freeway killer were the subject of considerable media attention. Police investigators, having established a clear link between many of the murders committed during the previous year, also began to hunt for the killer en masse, and they created a task force dedicated to investigating and arresting the Freeway killer. Subsequently, William and Pooh were apprehended and charged with vehicle theft, and subsequently transferred to Los Padrinos Juvenile Court. On May 29th, after learning of an ongoing series of murders on local radio, Pooh disclosed to a counselor that he believed the perpetrator's modus operandi was consistent with the description provided by William 2 months prior. The counselor then conveyed Pooh's suspicions to the police, who promptly dispatched a detective to conduct an exhaustive interview with Pooh. Although Pooh concealed the fact that he had accompanied William on the murders, the information he provided also led the detective to deduce that William might indeed be the Freeway killer. At this juncture, David McVicker contacted the police to report his suspicions that William was the perpetrator. His suspicions were not dismissed. Rather, they were considered one of many open leads that needed to be investigated. The police investigation into William's background revealed an extensive history of convictions for sexually assaulting juveniles. In addition, the police department assigned a team to monitor William's movements. On June 2nd, the same day the police initiated surveillance of William, he and Monroe encountered an 18-year-old printer named Stephen J. Wells standing in front of a bus stop. William and Monroe lured Wells into the van, and after learning that Wells was also bisexual, William convinced him to accompany him to his apartment with the promise of $200 if Wells would allow himself to be tied up before having sex. At William's apartment, Wells was raped, beaten, and then murdered. Subsequently, William placed Wells' body in a cardboard box and transported it to the van with Monroe. They then proceeded to drive to Butt's residence. William initially extended an invitation to Butts to view the corpse of Wells. Upon viewing the body, Butts responded with a remark indicating his recognition of the deceased as another victim. When the time came to dispose of the body, Butts advised William against discarding it in the canyon, citing the lateness of the hour. Consequently, Wells' body was discarded behind an abandoned Huntington Beach gas station. Furthermore, the police maintained constant surveillance of William, observing him traversing the neighborhood streets in a seemingly aimless manner, attempting to entice some of the young men into his van, though these efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Despite William's successful enticement of a young male into his vehicle, the officers persisted in their pursuit until William's van was situated in a desolate parking lot in close proximity to the Hollywood Freeway. The officers proceeded with caution as they approached the vehicle, and upon hearing muffled screams emanating from within, they forcibly entered the vehicle and discovered that William was attempting to strangle a 17-year-old runaway named Harold Tate. Subsequently, William was apprehended and initially charged with rape of a minor and detained on suspicion of murdering Charles Miranda. A search of William's van yielded numerous items that could prove his culpability in the series of murders. These items included nylon rope, various knives, a tire iron, and household items such as pliers and coat hangers. Additionally, the interior of William's vehicle and portions of his residence exhibited substantial evidence of bloodstains, and the interior handles of the passenger side and rear doors had been removed, suggesting that the victims were prevented from escaping the vehicle. Additionally, a journal related to the murders was discovered in a box. Despite initially protesting his innocence, William ultimately confessed to the crimes. Over the course of several nights, he admitted to kidnapping, raping, and killing 21 boys and young men. He expressed no remorse for his actions, but he did express regret for his arrest. William stated that his primary accomplice throughout the killing spree was Butts, and that Miley and Monroe were active accomplices in the other murders. William demonstrated no indication of remorse for his criminal actions, despite being interviewed by a journalist. He asserted that, had he not been apprehended, he would have continued his killing spree and would have been unable to cease his actions. Furthermore, the police posited that William was culpable for approximately 15 additional homicides, given the physical connection between his DNA and the blood and semen stains found at numerous crime scenes. Furthermore, investigators discovered that the hair samples taken from the bodies of 3 victims matched those of William. Medical evidence also indicated that 6 of the murders attributed to William were carried out using a distinctive strangulation technique. Initially, William was formally indicted for the murder of Marcus Grabbs on July 25th. By July 29th, he had been charged with an additional 15 murders. The prosecution posited that the available evidence was sufficient to secure a conviction. In addition to the 16-count indictment for murder, William was charged with 11 counts of robbery, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of mayhem. On August 8th, the charges were formally filed. 3 days later, William was without legal representation, in contravention of Penal Code Section 987. Consequently, the court appointed an attorney named Earl Hansen to serve as his legal representative. Hansen continued to serve as William's legal counsel until October 1981, when, at William's request, he was replaced by William Charvet and Tracy Stewart. Butts was also apprehended by the police. He was brought to court on July 29th and formally charged with aiding William in 6 murders committed between August 1979 and April 1980. Additionally, he was charged with 3 counts of robbery. Despite initially maintaining his innocence, Butts ultimately entered a guilty plea on all counts, including accompanying William on the murders and actively participating in the sexual abuse of multiple victims. However, he asserted that his involvement in the torture of the victims was limited. Nevertheless, he admitted to actively participating in the torture of 1 victim. In response to questioning regarding the discrepancy in the severity of blunt force trauma sustained by the victims, Butts posited that in numerous instances, William would intensify the degree of physical abuse inflicted upon his victims if they resisted his sexual advances. On November 14, 1980, Butts was brought before Orange County Municipal Court Judge Richard Orozco. On that date, he was formally charged with involvement in 3 additional murders committed in the county. His trial was scheduled to commence on July 27, 1981. On July 31st, Monroe was apprehended in his hometown of Port Huron, Michigan, and subsequently extradited to California, where he was charged with Wells murder. On August 22nd, Miley was apprehended by Texas authorities and subsequently charged by California officials with the murders of Charles Miranda and James McCobb. He was apprehended subsequent to acknowledging his involvement in the February 3rd homicides during a recorded telephone conversation with an acquaintance. On December 18th, he initially entered a plea of not guilty to 2 first-degree murder charges. However, at 2 separate pretrial hearings held in May 1981, he formally admitted to both charges. On January 2, 1981, William entered a formal plea of not guilty at a preliminary hearing held in Los Angeles Superior Court in Los Angeles County. The charges included 14 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of sodomy, robbery, and mayhem. On the same day, Butts was arraigned on 5 counts of murder in addition to 3 counts of robbery. The judge postponed Butts' formal plea date until January 7th. 4 days later, Vernon Butts committed suicide by hanging with a towel in his cell. On October 19, 1981, William was tried in Los Angeles County on charges of murdering 12 victims whose bodies were discovered in the area. The trial of William commenced on November 5, 1981. The proceedings were held in Los Angeles County, California. In his opening statement to the jury, the district attorney, who sought the death penalty for each of the murders for which William was on trial, stated, "We will prove that he is the Freeway killer because he bragged about it to some of the witnesses." The strategy of William's defense attorneys, William Charvet and Tracy Stewart, was to challenge the credibility of the numerous prosecution witnesses and to argue that the root cause of William's behavior was rooted in the physical, sexual, and emotional abuse he suffered throughout his childhood and adolescence. In support of this argument, William's defense attorney called upon an expert on the effects of violence and abuse on child development. The expert concluded that William's repeated abandonment during his childhood deprived him of the nurturing, protective, and behavioral feedback that are essential for psychological development. In a direct rebuttal, the prosecution called a forensic psychiatrist and expert on impulse disorders and sexual sadism to testify that William's pattern of behavior was inconsistent with an inability to control his impulses. Ultimately, the jury concluded that William was a sexual sadist and suffered from antisocial personality disorder. On December 16, 1981, both attorneys presented their closing arguments before the jury, which continued its deliberations until December 22nd. In their closing arguments, the prosecution characterized William as an insatiable and heartless individual who acted with malice and derived pleasure from inflicting pain on his victims. The initial trial of William, which commenced on December 16, 1981, and concluded on January 6, 1982, resulted in a guilty verdict for the 10 murders for which he was on trial. On January 20th, the jury additionally determined that the special circumstances outlined in California law were applicable to the 10 murders for which William was convicted. They then unanimously recommended that he be sentenced to death. In his second trial, William was additionally charged with 4 murders, in addition to the 10 for which he had already been tried. Ultimately, William was incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison, awaiting execution by gas chamber. On February 23, 1996, William was executed by lethal injection in the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison. This made him the first person in California history to be executed by this method. Prior to his demise, William exhibited no contrition for his criminal act and left behind a written statement. The note read, "I do not believe that the death penalty is an effective solution to the problem at hand. I feel that it sends the wrong message to the people of this country. Young people act as they see others act, not as they are told to act. I would suggest that when a person wants to do anything seriously illegal, they should consider the consequences of their actions before they act. They should think carefully about the potential outcomes of their actions and the impact it would have on others. However, the repentance of serial killers on their deathbeds is often an implausible scenario. It is not that they recognize the wrongfulness of their actions. It is that they are aware of their impending demise.